Today with topic 5, we're going to be talking about sustainability. One of the major things that we have happening in our world is we affect a lot of it as humans. So we affect it through agriculture, development, industry being tourism, um, agriculture being another one, just because when we grow food or natural resources like water, different things like that. And all of these things have impact on the quality of Earth's natural resources, which is soil, water, and the atmosphere. Like other organisms, we affect it when we obtain food. So, however we do it, whether it's fishing or it's we eat meat or even the veggies we eat, by eliminating waste products. This is your poop, your pee, all these things, and how we build the places we live, whether we take over a lot of land or not. So most of us don't think about land, food, and water as limited resources, but they are. So today, as of today, we've used or altered more than half of all the land that's not covered with ice and snow. So some people suggest that as we continue reaching 9 billion people, we may hit carrying capacity where basically we just run out of space, run out of food, or run out of natural resources. So modern agricultural practices, this is dealing specifically with agriculture. So monoculture is something that they've done to double world food production, which is basically they clear a whole area of land and they only grow one crop that makes a lot of that crop. So it enables efficient sowing, tending, and harvesting of crops using machines. So if it's just corn, they will only grow corn in that area, or if they just grow wheat, whatever it is, they will only grow there. The problem with that is that it takes a lot of fresh water and fertile soil. So when you grow just one crop and you don't rotate it, then you end up getting issues where the soil isn't fertile anymore, and then you have erosion happening. Also, with agriculture, you use fertilizer in order to make the soil more fertile, and that process of putting in the fertilizer releases a lot of chemicals that end up in our water, which then can affect the fish we eat. It can affect us. It can cause major issues that we will talk about later. Also, the machinery of the farm for the farm is also consumes a lot of fossil fuels like gas and diesel, and that releases carbon dioxide out into the air. Development. So as we continue to develop, a lot of people choose to live in cities. So a lot of those urban areas become way more crowded, and people start moving to the suburbs, which is a little more spread out. So that development produce a lot of waste. So the denser a population is, the more waste there is in that specific area. So if they don't throw it away properly, this can affect air, water, and soil resources. So something major that happens here in Florida is as we develop in Florida, we've broken up. Fragmentation means like you're breaking up the forest here. So specifically Everglades, we see that a lot here, that the Everglades have gotten a lot smaller. There's still a huge amount of Everglades left, but we shouldn't be developing more and more into there because we're just getting rid of all these natural habitats. Um, Things that we find normal convenience require a lot of energy to produce. So all the cars with Florida's major area, like the only way to travel in Florida is usually cars. It's too hot to walk far distances, and it's too much to ride bike and things like that. So we burn a lot of fossil fuels. We use coal, oil, and natural gases, and that affects the environment. So all of that is going to release gases into the atmosphere that are heating up uh, our world. So industries have discarded waste from manufacturing and energy production directly into the air, water, and soil. So smog is something that's produced by chemical reactions, and we don't have that a lot here in Florida, but California does. And I'm going to show you pictures later on what smog specifically looks like. But it's a lot of chemicals that are built up, and it can cause a lot of respiratory issues. If we develop sustainably, meaning that we find a way to produce things in a way that continues, like we can keep using it over and over again, or one that doesn't cause a lot of issues later on, like it produces too much waste or anything like that, then that's obviously a good thing. So we have to find that balance of resource use and sustainable, like it remaining sustainable. So goods are things that we can be bought and sold that have value in terms of dollars and cents. Services are processes or actions that produce goods. So with the ecosystem, it actually provides us with a lot of goods and services for free, but we can't overuse them. So healthy ecosystems produce a lot of goods and services naturally. So our air that we breathe is 100% free, but it can be running out sooner or later. Hopefully not sooner. And then drinkable water is something that's also produced free of charge, even though we pay for bottled water. So if the environment can't provide these goods and services, then society has to spend the money to produce them. So that's what happens when we have bottled water. So if our water's not clean enough, like think about when we get boil alerts, usually, what do we usually do? Instead of boiling the water, we go and to Publix and buy bottled water and just use that instead. So in other places, drinkable water is produced naturally by streams, rivers, and lakes, and then they're filtered by wetlands. Believe it or not, Florida has some of the most, like the best natural water because we have a lot of natural aquifers around here, and that helps produce clean water. So other things that um, so other resources that we can talk about are renewable and non-renewable resources. So a renewable resource can be produced or replaced by a healthy ecosystem. So wind is a renewable resource; it's constantly going. Other resources that are non-renewable that can't be replenished are like fossil fuels. Everyone kind of knows it's coal, oil, and natural gas. These resources are formed from buried organic matters over millions of years ago. So using these natural resources in a way that doesn't cause long-term harm is called sustainable development. So we cause no harm to the soil, water, or climate on which it depends. So it should consume as little energy and material as possible. So we also have to take into account our economic systems because we use those resources that are made for free by the ecosystem, and we use them for goods. Like they sell them. Zephyr Hills water, Nestle water, all of those. If soil is bad, then obviously we can't continue growing the crops that we need to grow. Also, if the soil is bad, then we get a lot of erosion, which I talked about a little bit earlier, but now you're going to see it. So the top of the soil is a renewable resource only if it's managed properly. Like the monoculture of it, when I talked about monoculture, that's not good for that top soil because it's not fertile anymore. So it causes it to get damaged, and then when you don't have good topsoil, then you get something like the Great Dust Bowl, which it happened in the 1930s. All that fertile soil was no longer there. There was a severe drought, and then everything, there was huge dust storms. So that was a result of just leaving the soil vulnerable to erosion. Um, so you move the removal of soil by water or wind is soil erosion. So it can cause areas to just be wasted away, like it's super dry. Um, there's nothing fertile there to even grow anymore. So you just ruin that land until you can end up refertilizing it naturally. Because, like I said before, fertilizer also causes major issues when it goes into the water. Soil erosion is often worse when the land is plowed and left barren between plantings. So if you don't have constant planting happening, it can cause a lot of issues as well. So if there's no roots holding it in place, it's washed away. So in parts of the world where there's really dry climates, obviously not here in Florida because we have a lot of humidity, um, it can be a combination of farming, overgrazing, seasonal drought, and climate change causes it to turn into a desert. So here in this area where like Arizona, Nevada, this specific area right here where it's red, that is a lot of desert there. So that means so these are areas where a lot of soil erosion happens. Deforestation also has a negative effect on soil quality. So the more trees you cut down, the more open that area is to have soil erosion happen. So forests that have never been cut, so a lot of the so more than half of the world's old growth forests areas that haven't been cut have been lost to deforestation. So they cut those areas out. If we have a healthy forest, it holds the soil in place. It protects the quality of fresh water because it's constantly filtering it out. It absorbs carbon dioxide, which is great for our climate, and it helps moderate the local climate. It keeps the area humid and whatever it needs to have in order for that area to continue to grow. So deforestation, like I said before, can lead to severe erosion. If we knock those trees down and if animals are also grazing that area, that can change the local soil and then microclimates and change microclimates in that area as well. So now in if that forest used to produce a lot of humidity, you knock down all those trees or overgrazing happens, that area now is lost, has no humidity, and it's very hot. So primary sources of water pollution. So a lot of them are actually industrial and agricultural chemicals. So those I'm going to talk about it in a little bit later. Residential sewage and non-point sources. So we depend on fresh water, obviously, because we need to hydrate all the time. So freshwater and freshwater ecosystems are include drinking water industry, which means that our whatever area is producing with all the warehouses and stuff like that, they get whatever goods and services that we need, the industry is using them. Transportation, believe it or not, our transportation does need water. Energy and waste disposal. Waste disposal, think the toilet. Some farmland relies heavily on irrigation. So I don't know how many of you guys have ever driven around Homestead, but you see a lot of those farm areas and you see those giant sprinkler systems. That's what it's talking about with irrigation. So some sources of freshwater aren't renewable. We actually had, not talking about this specifically, but we had time where we actually didn't have a lot of rain in Florida. I know it's shocking, but Okeechobee, Lake Okeechobee, we went through a severe drought. We still had some rain, but not a lot. And Lake Okeechobee actually went down. We weren't able to use Lake Okeechobee for anything, and it took like a year or two for that to replenish enough for us to continue using it. So that source of fresh water, not renewable. Freshwater sources can also be affected by different kinds of pollution. So a pollutant is anything harmful that can enter the biosphere. So things like oil spill, think about the BP oil spill where it spilled all that oil into the Gulf of Mexico. That's a point source pollution. Other ways is, like I said before, like when you fertilize an area, there's runoff. So once you put that fertilizer there and there's rain, it's going to run off along the sides and it can end up in these areas of water. And then it can cause something called eutrophication, which basically takes away all the oxygen. And then anything that was living there now no longer has oxygen, they die. Um, Things from smaller resources like the grease and oil that's washed off the streets by rain, believe it or not, that can also end up in the water, and these are all non-point pollutions. They can be accessed through wells. A lot of them happen mostly because of industrial and agriculture. Residential sewage, a lot of the, like all the waste that you guys produce into your toilets has to end up somewhere. And usually that's what it means by residential sewage. It ends up either in all of our freshwater or even our oceans, it can end up there. And then what they do is they heavily filter it out. So when it comes back to us to drink it, it's no longer that bad for us to drink anyway. So one thing with the industrial and agricultural chemicals is we have something called biological magnification. So this is when a pollutant starts off with one organism, and then as it keeps going up the food chain, it ends up getting a lot stronger. So like it magnifies. So there was something specific called DDT, which was a pesticide to kill mosquitoes because there was a lot of mosquitoes um, around the farmland, and so they sprayed it to kill off the disease-causing mosquitoes and other pests. So this was called DDT, and what ended up happening with the DDT is it got into the water supply. When it got into the water supply, it was picked up. Let's say a fish ate a mosquito. So the fish ate the mosquito, and then so fish ate mosquito, and as it kept going up into the food chain, like I said, it increased. The DDT concentration increased because these animals don't eat just one. They eat multiple of whatever of that animal that they eat or whatever plant they eat. They eat multiple of it. So it's constantly that concentration increases and therefore causes these animals up top to be really affected. So while the producers may not be affected that much, as it continued going up, that's where it caused a lot more issues. So when it finally got to the fish eating birds, it caused their eggs, the eggs of pelicans, osprey, falcons, and bald eagles, to become very thin. And so this caused a decline in the population of all of them. So DDT was used in 1950s, caused all these issues. By 1970, they um, they had already banned it, and then the bird population is increasing. Like it's getting better. We still have issues with mercury. So if we eat a lot of mercury, which is in tuna, so if you like eating tuna every day, that's usually not good for you because that has a lot of mercury in it. So you're supposed to only eat it once a week. So here with residential sewage, like I said before, this is something that contains a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus. So that nitrogen, that phosphorus, when it ends up in the water, it causes dead zones where there's no oxygen or very little oxygen, and it causes something called algal blooms, which that's why you see this all this water filled with algae, and then around the dead fish, there's also a lot of algae. But since it took all the oxygen, caused this fish to die, and normally it's like a whole lake or whatever it is filled with fish. Water quality, it's important to obviously have really good water quality. When an area doesn't have good water quality, then a lot of the organisms die out there. So you have to treat the sewage with there's different things to it, but there's a good bacteria that's associated that helps prevent these oxygen poor bodies of water to happen. So we have to conserve the water, and we have to not let the water run. So you shouldn't, when you're brushing your teeth, you shouldn't let water run. Try to keep your shower short. Try to prevent holes in your hose and your water hoses from just constantly spilling out water. Major forms of air pollution, there is smog, acid rain, greenhouse gases, and particulates. So the atmosphere provides us with the oxygen we breathe, which is a mix of oxygen and nitrogen. Um, Ozone is a form of oxygen that is found naturally in the upper atmosphere. It absorbs harmful UV radiation. That's the UV radiation is actually what causes sunburns to happen and skin cancer. Um, and then greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor, and that helps regulate global temperature. Without these, the average temperature of the Earth would be 30 degrees cooler, 30 degrees Celsius cooler, which is like 90 degrees. So when the quality of Earth's atmosphere is reduced, people with asthma, this causes them to have more issues. So I don't know how many of you guys actually have an app on your phone that tells you about the air quality. I do because I know a lot of people who are asthmatic. Um, and I see when the air quality is low or high and how it makes them feel. Um, so this is smog. This is a picture of an area that has a lot of smog, and this is an area, the same land, same city, but this is without smog. So this is a gray brown haze, and it's because of chemical reactions. So this isn't fog. This is smog. So it's smoke and fog mixed together. So this is caused by industries releasing whatever products, chemical that they're having released from their areas, or and automobile exhaust. So ozone is one product of these reactions too. So this can cause people with a lot of respiratory issues to have a really tough day breathing. Acid rain is when we release these burning fossil fuels, this releases nitrogen and sulfur. This causes it to mix with the water vapor. They form something called nitric and sulfuric acid. And then this acid will then drop down from the sky with precipitation through rain. And it can cause lakes, streams, and wetlands for the pH in those areas to become too acidic, and then everything dies. And then it can also cause birds' eggshells to become so thin that they can't reproduce, so then bird populations go down. It also causes a lot of issues on stone statues. So here is a picture where you guys can see that this this is the same statue, but this is before it was affected by, or it wasn't as affected by acid rain, and this is after. Greenhouse gases. So these are the major greenhouse gases and how, like what releases it. So fuel, carbon dioxide has fossil fuel combustion and coal and crude oil mostly. Methane is produced by natural gas systems and landfills. So whenever we throw things away and they end up in the dump, we get a lot of methane from it. Um, Particulates. So these are different particulates and where they come from. But these particulates basically, you could think of them like tiny little, if you think of them like little grains of sand that are able to float in the air, imagine constantly breathing that in. It damages your respiratory system. And even if you're not asthmatic, it can cause major issues in the long run. So, those that do have respiratory issues, it's causing way more damage. So automobile emission standards and clean air regulations seem to be having a positive effect. Believe it or not, our cars are not releasing as much particulates as they used to. So if you have a car before 2003, like that's the year of your car, then more than likely those that car is releasing more particulates than the ones now. And we also have a lot more hybrid cars, Tesla, Prius, things like that that are helping. At one time before, our gasoline was actually used to have lead. I don't know how many of you guys help your parents pump gas, but the fact that it says unleaded is because it used to have lead in it, but then they realized that as people were pumping gas and breathing that in, it was causing multiple issues around to everyone. Our paint used to also have lead, like the house paint. So if you have your house painted before 1950, they have to test it to make sure it doesn't have lead, because then there can be a lot of health issues. Biodiversity is super important. Um, it benefits medicine, agriculture. The total of biodiversity is the total of all genetically based variations in all organisms in the biosphere. So all over the world, we have a whole bunch of different biodiversity amongst humans. We have different colors. We have different races, we have different genetic issues, genetic positives, different things like that, and that all that biodiversity helps us become stronger humans. So ecosystem diversity refers to the variety of habitats, communities, and processes. Species diversity determines all the different species in that given area, and genetic diversity is all the different forms of genetic information that are around from different species. So humans cause a lot of issues to biodiversity. So we alter habitats by hunting, we introduce invasive species, we release pollution into food webs, and we contribute to climate change. Human activity is causing the greatest wave of extinctions. We had so many extinctions from the past few years, especially, and we're constantly losing different species. If you look at the endangered and the extinct list, um, so many of them just happened within the past 10 years. Without diversity, so without species diversity, it's related to genetic diversity. if you think Florida alone, the Florida panther, it was hunted too much, and then I think a sickness, some kind of illness affected a bunch of them, and a bunch of them died out. So now we only have a certain amount. I don't remember the specific amount of them, but since they lack genetic diversity, if some other illness comes, it can wipe them all out. So it's really important to have genetic diversity. What I said before with habitat fragmentation, that's when like ecosystems get split up. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. We're constantly pushing species to extinction by hunting, like especially trophy hunting, which trophy hunting means they don't use any of the meat or the materials that they get from hunting for anything. It's just for the thrill of the hunt or for the picture, whatever it is. Versus like people who actually hunt because it has overpopulation. Like we have a lot of wild hogs in Florida, so there's a specific time that hunters are allowed to hunt wild hogs, and they can only hunt, I think it's males, or past a certain weight, something like that. They're only allowed to hunt those animals to prevent overpopulation from happening. And then all that meat is used, and the skin and everything about it is used in some way. Introducing habitats, like organisms to new habitats. Everyone knows about the Burmese python and all the issues that specifically caused here in Florida, in the Everglades. So somebody released Burmese python because it got too big as a pet or whatever it may be, and that Burmese python, it had no natural predators here in the Everglades, and so what ended up happening is nothing could eat it, so it reproduced, made a bunch of eggs. All those babies were born, and now they have free reign over the entire Everglades, which is huge, and they can eat whatever they want, and they just continue growing. And since it has no natural predators, it's going to continue to exponentially grow. Many pollutants also threaten biodiversity, like we said before, with DDT. Acid rain causes stress on them. Increasing carbon dioxide dissolves into the oceans, which makes them a lot more acidic, which then kills marine ecosystems. Everything is chained up. Like you can see the continuous chain of it. So you affect one thing and it can cause major issues, and it ripple effects. Um, let's see. So how do we conserve it? How do we conserve biodiversity? We have to protect individual species, preserve habitats and ecosystems, and make sure our neighbors are doing the same. So the Association of Zoos and Aquariums oversees species survival plans. So if they're trying to protect a threatened or endangered species, they will capture them and then create a breeding program where they mate them to ensure genetic diversity, like the maximum genetic diversity. So, like I said before with the Florida panther, you don't have those issues where if an illness comes, it wipes them all out. And we're constantly trying to conserve everything. So, we have natural parks, forests, and other protected areas where people aren't allowed to harm those animals or destroy anything or litter or anything like that. To make sure that these efforts are concentrated in the most important places, there's ecological hotspots, and this is where a significant number of species and habitats are in danger of extinction. So those areas are being focused on to make sure that they can save as many species as possible. These are the different hotspots that there are around the world. And this is a way that climate change increases other pressures. So if whenever there's air pollution, so this causes more bushfires and drier conditions, which releases more particulates in the air, which worsens air quality and human health. You can think of the Australia forest fires and all the major issues that caused. If there's urban heat island, which means that wherever the urban areas, cities, there's a huge higher temperature, then this can increase heat waves, which then can kill humans. It can kill other organisms because it's not in our we can't tolerate it. Introducing invasive species. This changes their range as temperature increases, which damages the ecosystem and agriculture, and that can cause predators that may not infect, may harm those invasive species and keep them limited. Now it can kill off that predator, and now that invasive species can exponentially grow. Um, Ecological footprints. Basically, this is what how much you use. So like your the land, the water, how much waste you produce, any of these things. This is what causes your ecological footprint. And America, the average American has a footprint that is 4 times larger than the global average. We use a lot more things, either from just what we're eating or the fact that we drive to different places, how much waste we produce, the size of our house, having a having toilets, having tubs, all these things cause our ecological footprint to increase. And then you can see here the ecological footprint compared to everywhere else in the world. So anywhere that's green, that's the least. Um, Red has a larger footprint. So you can see all these areas have it. So in 1974, there was a research team that demonstrated that gases called chlorofluorocarbons could damage the ozone layer. So CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, were used as propellants in aerosol cans. So think about 1974 and what was really popular in the 70s and 80s. I don't know if you guys know specifically, but hairspray was. Bigger the hair, the cooler you were in the 80s. So that was in an aerosol can. It was also in coolant for refrigerators, which kept the refrigerators cold, freezers, and air conditioners. Um, well, since everyone was using all this airlized can and all these products, it caused a hole in the ozone layer. So here in 1981, you can see it here, and this is as it's gotten bandaged, and I'm saying bandaged like in quotes, bandaged up here, so it's closing up. So it caused a hole in the ozone layer, which then allows more UV radiation to get in through that area, which can increase skin cancer. It can cause more sunburns. It can cause ice caps to melt more. But it's closed up over time. Here we're talking about overfishing. So from the 1950s to 1970s, larger boats and high-tech fish finding equipment made fishing easier. So in that time, people were catching way more fish, which caused a decline in fish, like the amount of fish that we're reproducing, which then makes it harder for us to eat. So they created guidelines on how many fish you can get and at what size. So that helps with overfishing. Aquaculture, which is the farming of aquatic animals, also is a good alternative to commercial fishing, and it limits environment damage. So restoring fish populations is very slow because we eat a lot of fish. And then some people just don't really care that there's regulations and guidelines, and so they keep killing all the fish. Um, Global warming is the increase in average temperature. So what our average temperature of the entire globe was, it is constantly increasing. 11 of the 12 years between 1995 and 2006 were the warmest years. Now, I don't have the actual information from 2006 until to 2020, but I know it's increased way more than this. And this is the difference between global warming versus climate change. So global warming is the increase of the Earth's average surface temperature. So this is specifically the surface temperature, and this is because of a buildup of greenhouse gases in that atmosphere. Climate change is a lot more general. So this refers to the long-term changes in climate. So this is average temperature and precipitation. The fact that we have so many hurricanes happening, that is climate change. And these are the different risks of having the degree change between 1.5 versus 2 degrees Celsius. And it tells you everything here. So in the yellow, it's only 1.5 degrees Celsius. In the red, it's 2 degrees Celsius. So each organism's range, we all have a specific range that we can only withstand. So the amount of humidity, the amount of heat, the amount of oxygen, we can get, whether it's too much or too little, we all have this range. So if temperatures rise, organisms will usually go to cooler places away from the equator. Um, Same thing with plants, flowers, breeding. This all can cause issues whether animals will breed on time or plants releasing pollen at a specific time depending on the temperature. So most of them follow seasonal changes. If we don't have those seasonal changes, it either causes them to do it too early or too late or not at all. So researchers have determined that the current warming is part of a natural cycle. Um, they haven't determined this, whether it's a natural cycle or it's caused by human activity. Um, by now we know it's human activity, and you can see how much greenhouse emissions are released in the 2000s, early 2000s. Um, so possible effects, we may continue to see sea levels rising, we may see ice caps melting, we'll see more coral reefs dying out. It can cause major droughts in areas, or it can cause major flooding in other areas. It can cause way more snowstorms to happen, or it can cause major heat waves to happen. So basically, it causes extremes in either direction. So we have to work on fixing this. So we have to change our behavior. We have to cut back on greenhouse gases. And it's difficult to learn and see what to do, but it is possible. Even small changes can cause major differences. So the emergence of electric cars and recycle by everyone doing recycling and green buildings, this is all helping. And that's it.